Before we check into today's video, please quickly check below to see if you've subscribed. It's totally free and allows you to never miss one of our stories. Captain Jebediah Tegander, commanding officer of the UTS Pembroke, sipped his coffee from a chipped ceramic mug, savoring the blend. Despite the faint tang of the recycled Starship water, he could taste the luxury. Usually, he and the rest of his sailors drank the same powdered instant coffee one could find anywhere else in human space. But this cup of joe was different. In the captain's mind, it was more a cup of Joseph. A cup of Giuseppe, even. He chuckled to himself and wrote that down in his personal journal. It was full of such snippets of wisdom and humor, he wished he could collate it into a memoir one day to supplement his commission. Rather than being brewed from the same freeze-dried crystals as the typical cup of extrasolar coffee, Tegander's mug of caffeinated ambrosia was made from genuine, honest-to-goodness Terran coffee beans. They were grown in Java, a small town in the Terran province of Alaska, known for and renamed after its commercial hydroponics bays. He would not normally indulge in such a luxury, but seeing as it was a gift from his wife to congratulate a recent victory, who was he to let the beans spoil? Hell hath no fury, he thought to himself, sipping guiltlessly. A mellow buzz at the door pulled the captain from his introspection. He looked at his quarters control screen on the wall, where one would typically control things like heat and music, and saw a notification pulsing in red. He tapped on it, and a video feed from the door opened as well as an intercom connection. At the door was Lieutenant Gatriza, a UTS officer assigned to Tegander's command. The daughter of Zamuz POWs that elected to stay in human space rather than be repatriated to their homeworld, she was among the first of her kind to enter the United Terran Starfleet's officership. She was quite proud of her Zamuz heritage, but was as staunchly loyal to Earth as any of her human counterparts. Her quarters seemed to have an equal number of posters depicting Zamuzish warrior saints and Earthling military figures decorating it at any given time, and her desk was covered in half-assembled models of old Earth military vehicles. She never bothered painting them. She absolutely hated the smell of paint, and she had trouble manipulating the little human-proportioned brushes. Gatriza was looking directly into the camera door, such that her snout took up most of the video feed. Captain Tegander suppressed a laugh and took a moment to compose himself before turning on his own video feed and speaking to the alien. He was mildly successful. "Good to see you, Lieutenant. I take it this isn't a social call." Thankfully, his indiscretion went unnoticed by Gatriza. She stopped hunching over to be eye-level with the door camera and stood at attention.
"Sir, there is a visitor who wishes to speak to you. He is waiting in conference room Charlie."
"Good to know, Lieutenant. I'll be right out," Captain Tegander affirmed, pulling his coat off a nearby hook and sliding it onto his torso. "Is it who I think it is?"
"Yes, Captain. Archbishop Mendez,"
Lieutenant Gatriz answered. Her stoic and disciplined gaze softened into a slight frown, apparent even despite the reptilian indifference of her face to human observers.
Question though? Aren't human clergy supposed to be celibate?"
Captain Tegander stopped for a moment, gobsmacked. "Yes, in his case, at least," he said with hesitation, as if unsure of the words reaching his ears. "What prompts you to ask this?"
"Well, everyone is calling him father,"
she said, thoroughly puzzled.
"It is confusing."
Much puzzled Gatriza about human culture, despite her growing up being steeped to her horns in it. This was one such area of confusion. In Zamuz culture, only bureaucrats were celibate, and gelded at that. Her people's war priests seemed to have the pick of the litter for mates, as a matter of fact. This time, Tegander did not suppress his laughter. "Ah, Gatriza, you still have much to learn about humanity." Archbishop Mendez of the Celestial Archdiocese of the Farallon system sat at one side of the rectangular conference room table. At the other sat Captain Tigander and Lieutenant Getreza. The aides and underlings of either accompanied them, half in clerical vestments and the other half in the military uniforms of the UTS. Usually, the United Terran Starfleet, and indeed the Terran government at large, hardly ever interacted with the clergy of their territory, outside of the former chaplains. However, this was a somewhat unique circumstance that warranted the attention of Earth and her military. The Farallon system, named for a foggy place on Earth on account of its location within a nebula that occluded sensors, was ravaged by sectarian violence. Indeed, many nearby human-controlled systems in this nebula were. The root of the conflict was a disagreement fomented by a group known as the Neophytoists. Their main and most contentious claim was that animals uplifted into sapience had immortal souls. The mechanism by which this occurred was debated over even within the movement, with some claiming all animals had them, while others believed the process of genetic uplifting itself imparted a human-like soul. The unique syncretism of animal rights and Terran theology was largely irrelevant on the galactic stage, but swept like wildfire throughout colonies where uplifted animals were commonly used for labor. The settled worlds of Farallon were such places, as they had relaxed laws concerning genetic experimentation and uplifting. They were some of the few places that uplifted animals mixed with the wider sapient population, rather than having their own planets, in the case of the famous Orca folk of Europa, or districts, in the case of the uplifted colonies of penguins scattered across Antarctica. The particulars of their faith did not interest UTS Command. Indeed, the profession of a Neophytoist creed was not disallowed within its ranks, though no chaplains espoused such beliefs. Rather, UTS had put Farallon and surrounding systems under martial law in order to quell sectarian violence, which threatened to spread to human core worlds and beyond. Its ships and armies were instructed to facilitate aid to the colony's civilians, as well as to root out and de-radicalize the remaining Neophytoist cells that refused to obey the ceasefire their more moderate peers had signed. It was in this capacity that Archbishop Mendez had sought an audience with Captain Tigander to make sure aid got to where it needed to be. His campaigning and influence in the galactic media had made him somewhat of a celebrity, and billions of credits and donations had flooded into the war-torn settlements of the nebula.
Well met, Captain. I must say you run a tight ship. I do not think I have ever seen such a clean or harmonious spacecraft.
Archbishop Mendez greeted. He was older and jovial, though his face seemed creased with stress.
And good tidings to you as well, Lieutenant Getreza. I have read your biography. It is very inspiring. I do believe this is my first time seeing a Zumuz in person. Farallon is almost entirely settled by humans and Terran derivatives, as you may know.
Captain Tigander appreciated the recognition of his leadership's effectiveness, but he did not linger on the compliment for long, looking to talk business with the clergyman.
It is good to see you as well, Archbishop. How may I help you? I do understand you are quite the busy man. It is surprising you have come to meet us up here rather than planetside.
Mendez smiled.
Well, as per my last transmission...
Tigander tuned out the rest, his heart sinking.
Ah, darn it, right. I forgot to reply to him.
He thought to himself, wincing. He had written it down on a sticky note, but neglected to heed it. On the Archbishop's part, following up to a transmission in person was quite the show of dedication. That was not lost on him.
Well, in my opinion, at least. What say you, Captain?
Archbishop Mendez concluded, awaiting a response with an eager gaze and steepled hands. The captain blinked, unsure of what was said or how to respond.
But of course, Your Excellency. That sounds good.
Archbishop Mendez chuckled and clapped his hands together.
Excellent! We'll see to it that is so. It is much appreciated."
With that, he got up and extended his hand to Tigander for shaking.
"I am glad you could make time for me, Captain. Now, if you excuse me, your chaplain has invited me to give a sermon. I must freshen up beforehand."
Captain Tigander shook his hand, as did Lieutenant Gitreza. The Archbishop used both of his hands for both handshakes. For Tigander, it was a matter of respect. For Gitreza, it was a matter of biological reality, as her hands were dramatically larger than his. As Mendez left with his entourage, Captain Tigander cupped his hand to the side of his mouth and whispered to Lieutenant Gitreza,
Lieutenant, what exactly did I just sign myself up for?"
Gitreza also cupped the side of her maw, though she did not bother whispering.
"You signed us up to help hand out aid rations to civilians and refugees this time next week, sir. Weren't you listening?"
Tigander could hear the words rumbling in her chest before she spoke like an automotive engine, and he winced at the volume. The Zamuz were many things, but quiet and subtle were not any of them.
"Seriously?"
he hissed with a measure of exasperation.
"Friggin' dang it, we're going to miss Sloppy Joe night in the officers' mess. Again!"
He shook his head.
"Oh well, what am I gonna do? Say no to feeding orphans and refugees?"
"I guess you'll have to have your fill tonight, Captain,"
Gitreza teased, snorting and clapping her hand on Tigander's back. She was also fond of the Terran Sloppy Joe. The meat-to-not-meat ratio spoke to her most primal sensibilities, and she enjoyed licking the pieces of grounded print beef free from her teeth in the hours following the meal.
"I guess so," Tigander murmured. "Well, should we attend that sermon before supper?"
Gitreza yawned, flashing a mouth full of sharp teeth briefly toward Tigander.
"I suppose we could, sir."
She faced the captain and smirked at her human counterpart. With a fore-ominous type of tone, she quipped,
"Make sure you pay attention this time. If you don't, there's no telling what kind of work you might sign us up for on accident."
Captain Tigander shuddered, remembering the yard work he had to do on his parish grounds in his youth. He resolved not to repeat it if he could help it. Peralta was one of the 3 settled planets of the Farallon system, staying true to the local naming convention. It was the most extensively settled as it was the most Earth-like, having needed only mild remediation to make it livable for humans and other Earth creatures. If there weren't so many planets called some variation of New Earth already, it would bear that name. Unfortunately, Peralta was also the planet most ravaged by the Neo-Fidoist insurgency. Gitreza and Tigander were made aware in their briefings of the radiological threat present on the planet presented by the sabotage of reactors and detonation of dirty bombs by terrorists. Along with the rest of those landing on Peralta, UTS and otherwise, they were issued the requisite cocktail of pills to stay healthy planet-side. Gitreza's pill box was noticeably larger than the rest, as were all the other Zamuzas. Their dosages had to be adjusted to compensate for their inhuman size and metabolism.
"I hate pills. Can we crush these up and put them in our food?"
Gitreza complained gruffly to the medical officer. Her extended claws rapped against the side of her pillbox, which was painted in pink and decorated with stickers of soldiers and tanks. The medication capsules inside were the size of grapes.
"I'm afraid not, ma'am. These need to reach your stomachs intact for them to work properly,"
the medical officer responded flatly, typing away at the PDA on his wrist.
"Though they do offer these as suppositories, if you feel so strongly."
Gitreza's face scrunched up in disgust at the offending human's wry wit.
"Ah, I think not."
"I thought so, ma'am,"
the medical officer muttered, turning away to focus on someone else. After receiving their supplements, Lieutenant Gitreza and Captain Tigander entered the hangar bay of the Pembroke. In addition to the usual attachment of UTS starfighters and interceptors, there were dozens of other vessels as well. The split between human and foreign xeno organizations was about 50-50, and all operated under the oversight and banner of the galactic community, as per the terms of the ceasefire. Anyone caught targeting vessels bearing the mark of the galactic community was to stand trial at an intergalactic tribunal. UTS planetary assault troops and Galcom peacekeepers were both present. The difference between them was stark. Galcom peacekeepers were only armed with tasers and cheap service plasma casters, and wore a blue uniform with a matching omni-ergonomic beret. On the other hand, the UTS troops were dressed in black fatigues with red accents. Their weapons, usually a kinetic battle rifle or slug-throwing automatic shotgun, were clearly a cut above the Galcoms in terms of potency. They were a mere hint of the ferocious reputation human ground assault troops had garnered across the galaxy. Gitreza and Tigander had to remind each other that they were not linking up with planetary assault today. Instead, they sought out Archbishop Mendez's planetary shuttle. It was recognizable by its cruciform liveries and lack of even the most basic of armaments or shields. It was currently undergoing an inspection by its pilot before its scheduled launch, slated to happen in a few hours. Gitreza was the first to spot Mendez again. The clergyman was speaking to two aliens in the uniforms of their aid organization, a muted teal garment similar to a jumpsuit. The organization's name roughly translated to Feeding the Galaxy's Many Mouths. Admittedly, it was more elegant in their tongue. The two uniformed Xenos, as well as much of their NGO, were members of the Talniran space race. They were similar in appearance to Terran anteaters, possessing the same beady eyes, long fur, and pronounced snout. Along with the Zumuz, they were some of the only Xenos who could breathe a human-normal atmospheric mix with minimal medical intervention.
Ah, Lieutenant, Captain, we were just talking about you two. Good day. I am glad you could make it,
Archbishop Mendez greeted. He gestured toward one of the Talnirans.
This is Zimi. You'll be helping her and I distribute food to the needy.
Zimi waved hello and pressed a button on a thick collar-like necklace she was wearing. Its translator crackled to life, outputting audio from a tinny-sounding speaker on its front.
Greetings, human man. Name is Zimi. Am from desert planet Talnis Imsa. In solar system Talnis. Earth Protectorate. Appreciate aid help.
Rather than processing her speech, Zimi's collar directly transmitted her thoughts into a spoken language as long as she held a button down with her furred finger. It took some training to use, mostly to prevent intrusive and unsavory thoughts from being transmitted. The Talnirans were capable of speech. Indeed, their language was quite complex and beautiful. However, they felt the nuances of their language were lost in translation when communicating with outsiders, and so preferred thought to speech whenever possible.
Ah, cute!
Lieutenant Gitrez cooed in her deep, rumbling voice. Even the most rudimentary of interspecies sensitivity trainings advised against comments such as this. But there was enough well-regard and fear among those present for the comment to go unchecked.
Archbishop, where did you find these two? Are all Talnirans like this? If so, I think I must visit Talnis Imsa at once. If they weren't sapient, I would own one as a pet.
The last comment seemed to cross the line for the other Talniran, a male. He turned on his collar and spoke up.
Do not patronize us, accursed lizard woman thing. We have rights.
He seemed chronically unhappy, apparent in both his slouch and gaze.
Name is Alnar. Also am from desert planet Talnis Imsa. Work for Talnis Gazette. Am disaster and war journalist.
He squinted at a passing patrol of UTS planetary assault soldiers.
Am also wary of human intentions and of Zumu's intentions. Both warmongering imperialists. Same P of pod. Wow, oppressor just as annoying on other planets as they are on mine.
Captain Tigander thought to himself. He glanced at Lieutenant Getreza, who seemed equally unhappy at Alnar's name-calling. The captain cleared his throat and spoke up.
Well, we're glad to have both of you here, Alnar and Zimmy. The Talnis system is very far. I am grateful you have come on such short notice in Farallon's time of need. How may we be of service?
Zimmy and friends cook food for Peralta. Priest man, army man, and army she-worm give food to Peralta humans. Alnar film everything for Talnis Gazette evening show.
Worm?
Lieutenant Getrez gasped in indignation, clutching her torso. Worm, Lieutenant, with a Y, you know, like the oldie-timey word for dragon.
Captain Tigander reassured his ornery friend. He turned to Zimmy once again and inquired in jest.
Geez, woman, where did you get your translator collars? A Renaissance fair?
On Talis Imsa? No such thing. Not possible,
Zimmy said. Either the joke was lost on her, or she let it maroon on purpose. Knowing how cunning and language-oriented the Talnirans were, Tigander just took it on faith that it was the latter.
Anyways, please inspect provisions. Human diet very strange. Am unsure if Zimmy picked food good to serve.
Ushered by the two Talnirans, Tigander and Getriza stepped inside of their civilian shuttlecraft, which was parked next to the Archbishop's. Inside of it were bags of dehydrated human food, and a box labeled spices. Venturing a look inside, Tigander unclasped the lid and peeked into the spice container. It was less than half full, possessing only salt and dehydrated mayonnaise crystals.
Zimmy, why is there only mayo in here?
The captain asked, appalled.
Other spices seized by Talnis Customs. No time to buy new spices, Zimmy explained. Paprika, coriander, pepper, all seized.
Tigander sucked in air through his teeth.
Ooh, that's rough. Well, hopefully the food fared better.
He closed the spice box and turned his attention to the real food. It was Spartan, lentils, ab rice, and dehydrated print meat, as well as vitamin powder to fortify the slop into something more nutritious. The selection of food was what made Getreza dismayed. She poked the sack of print meat, which bounced back slowly.
What? Where is the rest of the meat? Surely even humans eat more than this?
Captain Tigander disregarded her concerns, standing before several empty crates.
Getreza, I think there's a bigger problem, he said, pointing to the scattered boxes. These are labeled and smell like coffee, but there's none left. It's not food, but I say it's just as important.
He turned to Zimmy, rubbing the bridge of his nose in frustration.
Ma'am, where has the coffee gone?
Zimmy closed her eyes, reciting her excuse as if she had practiced it 100 times.
Talnis Customs officer very angry about coffee. Called it human party drug. Zimmy almost go to jail. Alnar also almost go to jail again.
The captain frowned. The food was lackluster enough, but no coffee? He had enough first-hand experience with running a warship to know that the morale and productivity impact of a coffee shortage was nothing less than cataclysmic. Then inspiration struck him like an orbital strike.
Wait here, everyone. I can fix this.
With haste to his gate, Jebediah Tigander jogged toward a cargo elevator, leaving the aliens and clergymen to their own devices inside of the hangar bay. Stepping out of the Talniran shuttle, Getriza and Tigander were hit with a wave of cold, humid air. The human found it refreshing, but his Zamuz counterpart seemed to wilt in the biting chill, despite wearing her officer's jacket, an unfortunate reality of her tropically adapted physiology. Despite hailing from a desert planet, The Talnearans seemed unperturbed underneath their layer of insulating fur.
Gah! You humans pick the worst worlds to live on!
Getriza whined gutturally, her maw clattering in the cold as a human's teeth would in colder weather. Captain Tigander laughed at the lieutenant's complaining.
Trust me, there's even colder places on Earth, he chuckled. This is tank-top weather for some people. The lady doth protest too much, methinks.
As much of the planet's infrastructure was heavily damaged by combat, the aid shuttle resorted to landing on a grassy soccer pitch in one of Peralta's harder-hit towns. Similar civilian spacecraft were landing nearby, within a defense perimeter manned by both Galcom peacekeepers and UTS troops. Though the various organizations were still setting up their booths, lines stretching entire city blocks had already begun to form. As expected, those queuing were mostly folks displaced from their homes, having gone weeks without a hot meal. Curiously, it was not only humans in line. Uplifted dogs, recognizable by their visible cybernetic implants and surgical scars, were also waiting patiently for emergency rations. Most came as they were, but many were piloting exoskeletons tailored for them, allowing them to work and interact with objects as a person would. They were mainly used in physically demanding tasks like construction and mining. One such exoskeleton-clad dog approached Zimmy and Alnar. Just like the Talnearans, she spoke through a speaker on her collar that interfaced directly with her mind.
Hi, my name is Almond. Are you guys with Feeding the Galaxies Many Mouths?
Indeed they are, civilian,
Getriza answered affirmatively.
But there is a line. You must go to the back of it to get any food. It's only fair to everyone else.
Oh, no! I am here to help cook food,
Almond reassured, clasping the hands of her exoskeleton together with a dull clank. She turned to Zimmy.
Didn't you get my transmission?
Zimmy only rubbed the back of her head guiltily.
Apologies. Replying fast. Zimmy very bad at.
First time?
Tigander asked in jest, sympathizing with Zimmy's plight. In order to save face, Zimmy directed her attention to the food, beckoning for Tigander to follow her. The throngs of Talnearans offloading the bags onto the grass set the last sacks of lentils down. In their own pile were airtight crates of coffee beans, as well as some complicated-looking machinery covered in clinging wrap.
Zimmy, I thought you said that the customs officers in Talnis took your coffee,
Getriza asked, crouching to inspect the crates for herself.
This looks pretty untaken to me.
Before she could answer, Captain Tigander piped up.
It's from the Pembroke storage, Lieutenant. Gotta say, glad I thought of it in time. It was only a matter of...
Captain!
Lieutenant Getrez nigh growled, raising her voice. All in the vicinity stopped what they were doing to look.
You cannot take supplies from the Pembroke to give to these civilians. We aren't authorized to do that. It's rationed for the crew, and the crew alone. Are you crazy?
It's, my own coffee, Captain Tigander admitted. And indeed it was. Every crate was marked by the same Terran Coffee Company's logo, the same stuff he had been drinking for weeks now.
Sir, that's even worse! You can't just bring unsanctioned foodstuffs off-world! Ugh! To think this whole deployment, we've been one unlucky inspection away from a major league ass-chewing from UTS Command! What were you thinking?
Lieutenant, let me talk to you for a minute,
Tigander interjected. He put an arm around Getriza and ushered her behind the shuttlecraft. He popped a squat, and as she responded in kind by taking a knee and hunching over to be level with the human.
Look, I know they taught you to do things by the book at the academy.
Getriza huffed.
Forget the academy, Jeb. I'm a Zamuz, a proud one at that. I cannot simply look the other way as a human can. We have a code of honor that cannot be infringed upon. It brings us physical pain to even think of doing so.
Yes, and I respect that. I love that, even. But it's just some coffee. Surely you can overlook this. He sighed and put his hand on Getriza's shoulder. Let me level with you, Lieutenant. I know what the rules say, but these people have gone through hell and back. I mean, look around you. He gestured toward the crumbling highways and buildings in the distance, some of them still smoldering. She looked around her.
What of it? It is sad, but it changes nothing, she remarked.
Jebediah Tegander shook his head. Hardly. These people need more than just food right now. He gave Getriza a firm nudge in the shoulder for emphasis. I mean, you saw what those Talneran volunteers are planning on serving up. You said it yourself. Not enough.
Not enough meat specifically, but yes, their rations were meager-looking,
Getriza admitted. Indeed. Tegander thought for a moment before inspiration struck him again. Tell me, Lieutenant, what's the worst meal on the Pembroke? Lieutenant Getriza scoffed, as if she was asked the dumbest question in the galaxy.
Isn't it obvious? Breakfast! The sausages taste unenthusiastic somehow, and I am certain they make erasers out of the scrambled eggs they scrape off of people's trays.
And what does every UTS soldier drink with their breakfast chow? The realization was dawning on Getriza in real time.
Coffee! They drink coffee! As much as they can without getting yelled at.
And what happened when the coffee machine broke last month?
Oh, it was awful! There was almost a riot, like in the Hollow movies.
Tegander gestured with upward-turned palms, as if to say, Don't you see now? He made a face to match. There you go. That's exactly it. Getriza frowned slightly, creasing the scales on her draconic snout.
I still don't get it. Coffee looks and tastes like piss. I always drink the orange juice at breakfast chow.
Well, for you Zamuz, it doesn't do much. You just filter it out as a toxin. And for other species, it is a poison. Hell, most Earth animals can't even drink it, Tegander explained. But for humans, it's the best part of waking up. It gives us the energy to take the day head on and fully wakes us up. Some even say Earth's Renaissance and Enlightenment periods were spurred on by coffee.
So, it is like a drug?
Getriza questioned, cocking her head to the side. No, Tegander groaned. Well, yes, kind of. Look, I don't care what UTS command or some Talnis custom officer says. These people need their coffee. I can't order you to do anything here, since legally I'm in the wrong. I get that. So I'm asking you, politely, Lieutenant. A modulated electronic voice interrupted the officer's moment.
Imperialists! Corrupt imperialists at that! You say, quiet part, loud!
Lieutenant Getriza and Captain Tegander turned their heads to see Alnar filming their exchange on a hefty-looking camera. He had been standing behind boxes of supplies with it, only just now emerging from behind them.
Talnir Gazette will know! Talnir Imsa will know!
He narrowed his eyes.
Earth will know!
Tegander stammered, but Getriza covered his mouth with one of her scaled hands. She turned to him and spoke quite clearly.
You put me in a difficult situation, human. Remember this the next time you're thinking about whether or not to recommend me for a promotion.
She stood up and closed the distance between her and Alnar in a few strides. Before he could do more than interpose a limp arm to protect himself, she snarled and ripped the hollow video camera out of his hands. She threw it onto the floor and stamped on it repeatedly. She spotted the ejected data chip and ripped it apart with her teeth. She spat the e-waste out onto the grass before leaning down and putting a hand on Alnar's shoulder.
Hear me, Talneran. If anyone asks what happened to your camera, you will say a very fat man sat on it and did not give it back. Do you understand me?
Alnar gulped and nodded, his long snout bobbing up and down with urgency.
Good! Now be gone!
Getriza growled, pushing the furred alien onto the grass. She left him panting in the grass and walked back over to the captain.
Goodness gracious, woman, you stomped on that thing like it owed you money,
Captain Tegander muttered, standing upright and brushing off the front of his uniform. He couldn't take his eyes off the twisted heap of scrap and plastic that Alnar was quietly crying in front of.
I have a feeling you'd do the same if our roles were reversed, sir,
Getriza said wryly. She ran toward the camera as if she was going to kick it again, causing Alnar to flee in terror. She chuckled, returning to her superior's side.
Come, let's make some coffee for those civilians. I think I get it now.
Almond had just finished dumping the last of a sack's beef into a pot of lentils before seeing the two officers emerge from behind the shuttle. Pausing her culinary instruction midway, she wagged her tail and bounded towards them. Her heavy exoskeleton left divots in the grass wherever she stepped.
Where were you guys? We start serving soon.
She whined through her collar's speaker.
Just figuring out some logistics on our end. Don't worry about it,
Tegander shrugged. Almond handed the both of them aprons before taking one for herself and tying it around herself and her exoskeleton.
Make sure you wash your paws. Hygiene is very important.
Getriz watched the canine chef trot back to the cooking station to bark orders at the Talniran volunteers under her charge.
Wow! So saccharine! How can anybody be so upbeat right now?
She asked in earnest. Her voice was tinged with jealousy, as though Almond's ray of sunshine were casting her own self in shadow.
You and her are more alike than you know,
Tegander said, putting his apron on over his uniform.
Besides, she's a dog. She can't help it. No amount of uplifting can change that.
By now, the volunteers had worked out a fairly efficient system. The needy's hand, or paw, would be marked with an ink stamp to ensure they didn't get back in line. A heaping spoonful of the lentil and print meat gruel was to be ladled into a paper bowl, followed by an equally generous spoonful of ab rice placed directly onto their trays. Once these were dispensed, a cup of coffee was to follow, piping hot and brewed fresh.
Remember not to give any coffee to the uplifteds, only to humans. It's poisonous to us,
Almond reminded the volunteers. She stepped out from behind the table and rang a bell to signal the start of distribution.
One at a time, everyone! There's enough to go around. Come!
The din of the line's conversation cut out, replaced by more focused murmuring. The first in line, an elderly human, shakily extended his hand to be stamped. He retracted it and walked past the food, straight to the table with the coffee. Archbishop Mendez eagerly gave the grizzled old man the coffee he seemed to desire. Blowing on it only once, he quaffed half of the hot ambrosia down before attempting to hand it back to the clergyman.
Oh, keep it. It is yours to have, Mendez said, confused.
The old man looked at him wearily before shaking his head.
Sorry, force of habit,
he said, taking his coffee and going about his day. Even for the hard-nosed Taldirans, as well as for Lieutenant Getriz, it was hard to ignore the transformation the coffee induced in the battered and war-weary. The glint of hope and ambition the average human had in their eyes returned to them, and they seemed that much less troubled by the hand life had dealt them. At the very least, they were very, very awake. At the end of the day, after everyone had gotten their fill, the old man returned to the table. He approached the volunteers, still holding his paper cup.
Hello again. May I help you?
Almond asked, retaining her ineffable positivity even after a long day of hard work.
She smirked knowingly.
1 seconds?
Ah, no, I'm good,
The old man said, shaking his head.
though I would like to say thank you. I don't think I've had coffee since the insurgency started. I can't even begin to tell you how much I've missed it. Please, my compliments to your organization and the galactic community at large.
Thank you for the kind words, stranger. But...
Almond trained off, turning to Captain Tigander. He gave her a wink and an affirmative nod before returning to his own conversation.
You actually have the good people of the United Terran Starfleet to thank for the coffee. So I hear, at least.